Yo guys, what is up? Max on our first Descendant video, and today we're going over my build guide for Keelan. Now, because Keelan is a brand new Descendant, we're going to go over all of his abilities and talk about that first, and then we'll get into the builds, and then I'll kind of give you like my thoughts on this Descendant and things that are really good on him and things that aren't so good. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let's get right into it. Keelan is a toxic fusion, toxic singular Descendant. If you were to pick one thing to focus on, I personally would recommend focusing on Toxic Singular. Both his second and third ability are singular, and I think those are his two best abilities, but we'll talk about everything. So to start, his first ability is called Void Corrosion. Basically, this sends out missiles at enemies. They can hit up to 4 enemies, and your target count increases by changing by your range. So if you build more range, you can actually like get more targets with this, which is actually pretty cool. So you can get a max target count of 10 if you build enough range. Then it does damage and then additional damage, and it procs acidic erosion. And the skill reads, target an enemy, fire void corrosion. The hit receives acidic erosion. Additional damage is dealt if the target already has acidic erosion. And then the number of targets for void corrosion increases based on certain stats. So basically, if they're already dotted by you, you're going to be dealing an additional like 100 skill damage or 120% skill damage, which is really cool. The way to think about this character is he does like dots like Freyna, but his dots aren't actually like any damage. The dots are just a way to make your other skills deal more damage. You're basically, by inflicting dots, buffing yourself via your skills, but not your like real like dot damage, if that makes sense. His second ability is my personal favorite ability. This is called Onslaught. It's going to allow you to dash forward. The dash animation and like the way they've done it looks really good. You're able to get 5 stacks of this. It's on a massive cooldown. It's a 55-second cooldown per stack. So you need a gigaton of cooldown. That is going to be a big theme with Keelan. You need cooldown on literally everything. Anything that you could possibly squeeze cooldown out of, you're going to need it because his cooldowns are just so long. As you can see, we've got it on a 10-second cooldown where we're at right now. Then you're going to want with this, so he's got a like multiple hits of damage. So you're going to hit when you dash through an enemy, you're going to get that flat damage. So you're going to hit them with your skill power based on your range. Actually changes how far you dash, which is very cool. And then at the end of your dash, you're going to do a big burst AoE, which does like 876 burst range. And then once again, if targets are already applied by your acidic erosion, you're going to be able to deal an additional skill damage hit. Next up, we get to talk about Septic Gust. Septic Gust is a very interesting skill. This deals damage to enemies within range and inflicts acidic decay. If enemies within range are inflicted with acidic decay, it inflicts blood rot. Blood rot explodes, dealing damage to the targets and enemies within range. So basically, if you've already dotted enemies with this, it becomes a like kind of AoE nuke. But if you haven't, it's just a massive way to apply all of your dots to enemies. So this applies acidic erosion, just like the others. But if they're already hit with acidic erosion from your other abilities, you're going to proc this septicemia, which does a like AoE damage of 422. And it'll kind of just like blood rot, which like explodes all of your dot stacks on enemies, which is really cool. And then his last ability is Tremor. This is a pretty big hit, but in a very small range. So this says if enemies are within range and have acidic decay, you deal damage to them based off of your acidic decay stacks. If there are no enemies within range or they don't have acidic decay, it increases your onslaught stacks. So basically, if enemies are within range of you and they're dotted, you do this, and you're going to explode them for 1,700 modifier times 5 if they have 5 dot stacks on them, which can be a pretty significant hit. But if there are no enemies within range, you're going to get 3 of your dashes back, which is also really nice because that's 155 seconds of cooldown just instantly back by clicking this. And then his passive is acidic effusion level. Basically, when you're using your skills, you're going to rank up your acidic effusion level, which grants you agility. And if you're in combat and you're using your abilities, you're going to get skill power modifier increase and movement speed increase to get pretty speedy. But if you're not in combat, you're actually going to lose this. And the interesting thing about this acidic infusion level is it's basically your mana for this build. Keelan does not use any mana. You can cast all of your abilities, but certain abilities cost mana, as in, like, for example, your fourth ability cost 500 acidic effusion, your third ability cost 250 acidic effusion, but your 1 and 2 are like kind of generator skills. So these are skills that will generate your infusion level, and then you kind of spend them on your 3 and 4. So I kind of just want to give you like a little bit of like a rotation ish with Keelan. So you're most of the time going to start your fights using your 1 and 2, which can apply your stacks. And as you can see, as we're hitting enemies, we're going to be building up our like mana bar. All of these enemies are like dotted, right? And so if we hit our third ability in them, it'll basically do this big detonation. It does keep their stacks now. And as you can see, one thing that's really important on him is if you look at my fourth ability right now, you can see that it's blue. Well, blue because I'm out of mana. But it'll indicate if you're in range to detonate your tremor. The one really thing, like kind of weird thing, I kind of understand why they did it, but I'm not a huge fan of it, is tremor does not get increased range. So even if you're scaling 250% increased range, tremor does not gain any benefits from range. It only detonates in a very, very small radius. So as you can see here, I'm in space to detonate tremor, and as soon as I walk out, it's blue. And so now if I click this when it's not blue, I'm gonna get 3 stacks of my onslaught, and then if I click it when I'm close to enemies, I will detonate that tremor. So just to let you see what that looks like with tremor detonation, hit those guys for like 2 million damage. But it's also like only a few enemies. Only enemies you're really, really close to are going to get hit by that damage. But if you need to kill an elite, detonating that on elite will kill most of them. All right. So now let's talk about our build. We're gonna go over his main build and then like an onslaught build and a 4 build, and talk about my decision making behind all of them. I also do apologize. My Keelan is level 1 for this, just kind of how it is. I've been trying to grind as much as I can to get out as many videos for y'all. But let's talk about how to build him. So the first thing that we're going to need is HP. Now, because Keelan doesn't have any mana, we can put on Stim Accelerant because, you know, we get more HP from this. Sacrifice mana. It's totally worth it because negative mana is nothing bad for him. The next thing that we're going to need to do is build up damage. So let's check his crit rate. His crit rate is 5%. That is horrible. So we're going to go non-crit on him. And we're going to need as much cooldown as we can possibly get. So unfortunately, we're not going to be using like power increase on him or any of those kind of mods. So we're going to go focus on toxic. We're going to be mainly focusing on his second ability and third ability. These are his 2 best abilities where most of his damage is going to be coming from. So we're going to go toxic and singular and ignore fusion. We're mainly going to be using fusion as a utility to buff up the damage of his 2 and 3. So we're going to go for focus on singular. This is super important because focus on singular is going to give us more damage and more cooldown. Now, this is a descendant that benefits from both damage increases and, modifier and power. For example, like all of his base values are honestly pretty high, so you don't need that much modifier, but his acidic erosion, his dot is really small, so any bit of modifier, you know, if his modifier is 5%, adding another, like, you know, 10 or 45, where we're like massively increasing the damage of his modifier for his acidic erosion. And you can actually get his dots ticking for like 60 to 80k. So like if we add a bunch of modifier, we actually get a huge amount of return on his acidic erosion, not as much on his like main abilities, but we're going to want to stack as much power and modifier as we can. So for the rest of the damage, we are going to get toxic amplification and singular amplification. So this is going to be, now we're kind of all set with damage. We've got life. And now we got to look at his cooldowns. He's got a 60-second cooldown, a 55-second cooldown, and an 80-second cooldown. We need more cooldown. So then we're going to go for nimble, and we're going to go for MP. This is going to help us so much with our cooldowns. And now we've kind of got our health, we've got our cooldowns, and then we've got our damage. Now, the next big thing that we're going to need is range. He's got 250% range possibility, and we can dash further with range. We can hit more targets with his 1 with more range, so building range is going to be really important. So we're going to throw skill expansion on. He only gets 250% max range, and so by using a non-maxed maximum range, we are going to get enough Maximum range, we're at 155 plus our base, which is 100. So we're at 255 max expandable range. So we're good there. And now we have his last mod. And his last mod, you could kind of go whatever you want. I think there's a lot of really great options. For his last module, I'd recommend going either HP if you want some more survivability. With Keelan, we're basically in melee range like 90% of the time. So survivability with an extra HP mod makes him very tanky, and you just dash around without caring. If you dash into an exploding mob, for example, that happens a lot and chunks a bunch of your HP. You could go Spear and Shield. Spear and Shield would give us more defense, which is nice, but we're mainly going this for the extra power. This is what I was using in the gameplay. I do think HP is a little bit better of a mod. There are some other interesting options here that I just don't think are worth. The other interesting options are Potent Collector, which when you defeat an enemy, you get resource back for your custom resource. This could be nice, but I never really had resource issues with him. As long as you're in combat, you'd be able to spam your like 1 and 2 and generate a bunch of resource with him. The other weird option is technically Veteran Tactics. When defeating an enemy, it resets the cooldown of a random skill. The only thing is by ranking up this mod, you don't get any more chance to reset your cooldowns, so it's just not very good. It's not worth putting on a mod slot for 2.1% chance to reset cooldowns when you could just have like a whole ton more survivability. So yeah, in that last mod, I'd go either HP or Spear and Shield. Now, you may be wondering, why aren't we using a Transcendent module on his main build setup? So let's talk about that now. Let's talk about his Mobile Strike Transcendent module. Now, I think this is really cool, and it creates a really fun, kind of complex playstyle, but I think the downsides are too harsh in order to really warrant this kind of mod, and I'll talk about why, but why this has so much potential if the TFT devs decide to buff it. So if we put on Mobile Strike, it turns Septic Gus's damage off entirely. However, when we click this, we're going to get Adventurer's Spirit. And during Adventurer's Spirit, your 2 does not consume stacks. And if you have 0 stacks, you get to dash for free. But you only get 3 seconds of this. So basically, what happens is we click this button, and then you can look at my stacks. They won't go down. We just get to dash. Now it's over. Now I'm going to be consuming stacks. But you've got this setup where you've got the ability to just infinite dash for 3 seconds. Now, here's where this is tough. You can't increase the duration of this buff by increasing duration mods. So you're only getting 3 seconds of dashes, which at most is typically like 4 free dashes. And the cooldown on this goes from what normally is 60 seconds to 150 seconds. It's a 150-second cooldown. I think this is the largest cooldown that we've seen, and you only basically get 4 dashes out of it. So now you've got this massive cooldown. You've completely gutted your probably like best AoE clear ability by doing so, but you get to dash more often. But there's just like that downside is just so harsh. And then the other thing is it also lowers the damage of your dash. So if we just, I wanted to like, it looks too complex when Onslaught's got like all these crazy numbers. But if we just put on Mobile Strike, the Transcendent mod, you can look and you see my pierce damage is 213% with Mobile Strike on. If I take it off, I'm at 797. I'm massively nerfing the damage of my dash on a dash build. I don't know why the decision was made for this. And the burst damage goes down as well. So the burst damage is originally 876. When we put this on, now we lose another, like, it goes down to 730. So we've lost like 100 modifier on that. You do get the ability for corrosive acceleration, which is neat. Basically, while Adventurer's Spirit effect is active, your stack count does not decrease, and there's a chance to inflict corrosion acceleration. Corrosion acceleration is basically this like big hit that only has a 45% chance of proccing, but if it does proc, you get 342% of skill power in a big like radius that'll do damage on enemies. And like this is nice, but you have to consider that this is only a 45% chance of proccing on a 3-second buff that you just made for 150 seconds, and all of your damage elsewhere, unless this procs, is just less. It's basically you're just dealing less damage unless you get that lucky proc on that 45%. And that basically seems like I don't love it. I don't love it, but it's a really fun playstyle because you can do a few things with this. And I think if they buff this, like, this would be my preferred way to play him. But the way that I like playing him with this is we basically use R1, we dash around. As soon as we're out of dashes, we hit our third ability, and then we get more dashes, right? We can do all of those dashes, and then if we back away from enemies, we can hit our fourth ability and then do more dashes. And then now we have the effect of the cooldown, and you have to wait for all of your abilities to come back because all of them are on crazy cooldowns. But the burst damage that you get when it's up is really fun. You get to do 5 dashes into 4 dashes into 3 dashes, and then you kind of got to wait for your cooldowns to come back. And if they made the cooldown on the 3 less, you could do some crazy things with this. But the full dash setup is very fun. I just think technically he's better off without the transcendent module, and so that's why I'm not using it. But let's talk about the rest of this setup. So the setup doesn't actually change. It's quite literally the exact same build. I just don't have spear and shield on here. There's not really too much else to build on him, in my opinion. We're getting all of the range that we need. We're getting the damage. We're getting the cooldown. We're getting the health. Once again, you could put something kind of random here. Maybe you could throw in a ranked up veteran tactics for the 2% chance to reset your cooldowns on killing an enemy. I wish if this was 10%, this would be a must slot. 2% just seems like a little low to go for. But that is his mobile strike build. And then the last thing we get to talk about is his focus on prey ability, which I am also honestly not that big of a fan of. I haven't finished building him out, mainly because for this, I think you build around his fourth ability. That's what this mod seems like you'd want to do. And just a little underwhelmed by it, but I'll talk about how to get this to work. So focus on prey gives you void corrosion, is modified to target a single enemy with an increase to the number of projectiles fired, increases the maximum stacks of acidic erosion. So basically, you're able to stack your dot higher, and to me, this looked really cool. So you get your one ability to now only target one thing, but it's going to apply max acidic erosion stacks, and we can get 20. So before, we were able to get 5 stacks and detonate our fourth with 1,700 modifier times 5 for a massive hit. And now we can build up 20 stacks. So now we can detonate our fourth ability with 1,700 modifier times 20. And then you go over here and look that if you equip this transcendent module, it changes the fourth ability to have 494 modifier. Which I just don't understand why that is the case, because the whole thing with this would be you can dot less enemies, you can hit less things, but you can do more single target damage, but then you lose 80% of your single target damage with this. And I kind of want to show you how the math breaks down for this. To break down the math for that, on the main setup without the transcendent module, we're going to do 5 times 1,703 for an 8,515 hit. If we put on the transcendent module, we do 20 times 494 for a 9,880 hit. And if you break that down, that is a net increase of 16% increased damage. Now, 16% increased damage is not a lot. It is a little bit deceptive because, for example, if we add modifier mods to 494, we get a lot of value from them. If we add modifier mods to 1,703, we do not get a lot of value from them. So this is a little bit deceptive. We can squeak out a fair bit more damage than this, but it's just not as impressive as I was hoping for. And showing on screen should be some boss gameplay. Obviously, I didn't have a full build setup. I was definitely missing some things, but it didn't feel like he was quite great at bossing, and the fact that this only hits in a 6-meter radius limits this to just basically doing a single hit. And we've got a lot of other abilities in the game that do this much damage but can do it in a massive radius, versus this is locked in at 6 meters and it's a single hit. And so I was a little underwhelmed by this. But if you wanted to build around focus on prey, I think you would go for trying to squeak out as much damage as possible for things like power increase, fusion amplification. You still kind of want cooldown because if you don't kill the boss in one shot, which you probably won't, you're gonna want cooldown. So like focus on fusion, skill expansion, toxic amplification, stim accelerant, and then you could go. Sorry, this should technically be focused on toxic. Oh, right, we can't because power increase. But for the rest of the mods, I would go MP conversion here. Nimble fingers here. Go nimble for some cooldown. I would go dangerous ambush, so you could try to time your fourth when the boss goes down for a big hit. And then I'd probably go spear and shield as the last modifier. So we get dangerous ambush, we get spear and shield, then we get nimble, try to down the boss, and then when the boss is down, you hit the tremor, and hopefully that could deal some nice damage. I just wasn't really seeing it. Now let's talk about weapons, reactors, and components. So to start us off, for weapons, unfortunately, there's not anything that's like super synergistic with him. The Blue Beetle just got the Living Daylights buffed out of it. It's now amazing for Fusion Descendants, and it gives 115% in skill crit rate. Unfortunately, that's still not very good because like 100% increased crit rate is where you have 5 to build off of. So you don't really build him around crit. So Blue Beetle would work. It just doesn't really synergize with him very much. You can still hold this thing and get purification, so you can remove debuffs from yourself, which actually can be pretty nice. Obviously, you're going to be diving into a bunch of enemies, and if things are going to be shocking you, chilling you, slowing you, you just get to move freely. So the Blue Beetle is, in my opinion, the best choice, even if you're not benefiting from the crit. You're still going to be using like singular skills, so that's kind of would be my pick. I've also been using the Voltia on him a bunch to help with some AoE clear and clear bubbles when, you know, his abilities are on cooldown. I will have a full guide out on the Voltia soon, not quite. And then when we get to talk about components, I strongly recommend finding cooldown and toxic singular. This is the one that I was using, toxic singular, toxic power, skill cooldown. Gold cooldown would be great, but like the most important thing that you can possibly find on a reactor for this guy is cooldown. You just need it. It has to be on there. Ignore everything else. Make sure to find purple or gold cooldown. It'll make him feel so much better. And then I personally think is singular is the better way to go. If you wanted to go for the fusion route, I would go toxic fusion, probably fusion boost ratio and damage to Colossus to try to squeak out the most damage out of his fourth ability. For components, they did add a new component set that I wanted to use on him, called the Hunter set. Now, if we look up Hunter, this has some cool things. Mainly, we'd use a 2-piece set on this for 4% skill cooldown. You definitely wouldn't use the like 4-piece set because obviously he doesn't need mana. I'm not using this thing right now because I needed as much kind of HP on him because HP feels pretty good. But if you did want to use this, if you could find a good drop, I haven't found the sensor yet, I would go defense and HP, Hunter Processor and Hunter Sensor. Unfortunately, with this Hunter set, which would be really cool in like almost every character, it rolls max shield, defense, max shield, and HP. So you only get 1 HP roll. But for, you know, characters that are going to be going for like shield stuff, this could be pretty solid. But yeah, it is unfortunate that we still can't like get implicit rolls on the top to change because otherwise I'd be using a 2-piece Hunter immediately for double HP rolls and more cooldown on him. If you wanted to use a set on him, I think the Venom set would be pretty good. The only thing is the only piece that rolls HP is the Venom Essence Processor, which low rolls HP, and then you'd have to use the sensor for defense, and you're already getting a lower roll just for 6% power. I personally am just using like good components on him. The one thing that is really interesting about getting components for him is the fact that he doesn't have mana, and like basically everything that I've farmed for has been like mana rolls, mana regen, mana recovery, all those kind of things, MP recovery, and he doesn't need any of that. So like you can kind of put on whatever set that you have and get some things. Like I grabbed this Volcano Sensor with max HP, HP recovery modifier, and max MP. MP doesn't really do anything, but I'd stack a bunch of HP on him. You could grab like a bunch of resistances that you don't normally get to benefit from, which would be really nice, or any other kind of like things that you care about. because mana is or MP is completely irrelevant on him, which is pretty nice. It does open up some component sets, but I just basically grabbed all the things that max rolled high rolls of HP and slapped them on him. Obviously my HP is pretty low because I'm level 1, but when it's not low, we're sitting around like 13 to 14k HP, which is pretty comfy. I want to quickly mention, I wasn't able to unlock it for this video, but Arche Boost, on hitting 5 or more enemies with a skill, grants Arche Boost for 15% cooldown and speed and range modifier increase, would be really nice for him. This would be a way for us to get the much needed cooldown that he doesn't have, and I think this will make him feel better, but I did not have this for the video. I'm still working on leveling up my inversions. So now that we've kind of gone through the build overview, I just want to give you my impressions of them. If you couldn't tell through the video, I do think Keelan needs some love. I think the design of him is actually awesome. I really like his abilities. I like his skills. I think they just need to lower the drastic negatives on his transcendent modules, because they seem really cool to play around, but the negatives kind of outweigh the positives in a lot of cases, and it makes it harder for him to build around. 150-second cooldown on his third is just brutal. Losing most of your damage on your fourth ability just on something that you'd stack up to do damage with your fourth ability just feels bad. And I think they've got a really cool character here that is very unique, and this is one of the more interesting characters to play. I actually was taking note of my buffs and when to trigger my things, and it's very engaging gameplay. The dashing is really fun, and I really do enjoy my main build. He's got pretty decent clear speed. It's no Bunny or Freyna or anything like that, and he's not very good at bossing, but with some love, especially to some of his cooldowns and reducing the negatives on his transcendent modules, I think we'd have a really awesome addition to the first Descendant roster. But he is in a little bit of a rougher spot. If you're going to pick up this character and start playing him immediately, he just won't feel very good. It wasn't until I really started investing into him that I started to see his potential, mainly because you really got to get that damage up. You really got to get that cooldowns, and you need the range. You just he needs everything. But once you do, he's a pretty fun Descendant. He's just lacking in terms of build variety, because he can't really use his transcendent modules too much without really negatively impacting him. Guys, that's going to do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed. I will have plenty of more First Descendant content. I appreciate you watching, and I'll catch y'all on the next one, guys. Take care. Peace.